Welcome back to Conversational Witchcraft, everybody. Glad to have you here. I am Dawn, the Kitchen Witch, and before we get going, I want to make sure that you subscribe to this channel. If you love what we're doing here on Conversational Witchcraft, you can now support this podcast by clicking support us in the support us link and help me bring more great information, inspiration, magic, and conversations to you. So make sure you support us, you subscribe. You share this with your friends, like, follow, all that jazz. And don't forget to visit me to learn more about Cucina Aurora, learn more about kitchen witchcraft and food magic at cucinaaurora.com. Okay, let's get into it. Very excited today on Conversational Witchcraft. We have Annwyn Avalon. She is a water priestess and Celtic water witch. She is the author of The Way of the Water Priestess, Water, Witchcraft, Magic, and Lore from the Celtic tradition, and her newest book is The Celtic Goddess Grimoire. She is the founder of the Water Priestess Training, the Water Priestess Confluence, Bewitching the Waters Symposium, and Triskele Rose Witchcraft, an Avalonian Witchcraft Tradition. She has devoted her life to the study of esoteric water mysteries. Her path is one of sacred service to the waters of this world and her ancestor. Today, she's joining us from her home in Glastonbury, England. Annwyn, welcome. I don't know if I've had someone who is so much a water witch on the show before, and I'm just fucking fascinated.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's going to be watery for sure. I can't not talk about it. I'm obsessed.
I think that's fantastic. And I'm really, first of all, let me start with this. You're living in Glastonbury. You are a relatively recent resident of Glastonbury. Where are you from originally?
So before I came to Glastonbury, I spent 8 years in the Pacific Northwest, 45 minutes south of Portland on a my dream, beautiful 2-acre property with like rose bushes and hawthorn trees and a creek and chickens, and I had a peacock, all sorts of crazy things. I was just living my life, being of service to water in Oregon. And then I kind of got snatched away by the current and whisked off to Glastonbury. But I have lived kind of all over the US, and I even lived in Japan in the early 2000s.
So what was it that, I mean, I love the Pacific Northwest. I love Oregon. I went for a visit out there in 2019 and I left a little bit of my heart there. And specifically, right, the water, the ocean there. I grew up on Long Island, New York, so it's surrounded by ocean. It's never really been my jam, but going to the Pacific Northwest, that ocean spoke to a piece of my heart. So what was it that brought you from there to Glastonbury? I mean, what a difference.
Oh, right. I know. So, it all began when I was born. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, kind of, but not really. The short version is, so I have been on a simultaneous paralleling path of Avalon and like the Celtic mysteries and water. And even though I've been on this path of water mysteries for a really long time, water mysteries are universal, they're worldwide, they belong to every single culture that has ever existed and will, because it's such an important part of our makeup of who we are. We need it to survive. So it's a worldwide, timeless, element. And so I was on these paths very simultaneously. And of course, you cannot really get the Celtic path or the Avalonian path without water.
Yeah.
Because it is full of water. There's like just, I mean, folk magic around holy wells, spirits that dwell in lakes and lochs, and well, technically lakes and lochs are the same thing, but spirits that dwell within these lakes, the ocean and rivers. Like there's so many rivers that are named after goddesses, or goddesses that are named after rivers, or however that works.
Right.
And so I was definitely like deeply connected to Avalon, and I started on my Avalonian path around 2010, when my teacher was basically like, "Hey, you know you're Avalonian, right?" And I was like, "Oh, yes, yes, I know this. Like, yes, you're right, I am." And then I said, "But what's Avalonian?" And she basically, like, I just knew it. Like, it was,
Yeah.
there was something about it that just resonated so deeply, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I am. I am that." And so she sent me off to take classes with Mara Freeman, who has run the Avalon Mystery School for many, many years. And she has an academic and a spiritual background in Western mystery tradition. And I started studying with her, and through her, I was introduced to the mysteries of Avalon, and I really started to learn what I was like feeling and yearning for, and all these things that I was
Mm,
attracted to. She started really like laying it out. But
wow.
one of the things that's so important about Avalon, or modern day Glastonbury, is that it is deeply connected with water. Not only was this entire landscape underwater at one point, and we know it, it's a fact, because when we redid this shed and when I'm walking out and about, um, you can find ammonites everywhere. And so we absolutely know that
Wow.
this landscape was covered in water at one point. We also know that it was covered in water at one point because of the lake village artifacts that were found and excavated a long time ago. So there was
Wow.
definitely underwater. Then there was a Celtic lake village. So Bronze Age, Celts were living on the water. And they had like little canoes, and they found a canoe, which is really cool. It used to be on display in town. Um, but they definitely had this lake village was here. And then on top of that, we have the stories of the Arthurian legends that connect Avalon and to water being Avalon being an island.
Yep.
Um, Now, when you drive into Glastonbury in the modern day, you pass a sign that says, "Welcome to Glastonbury, the ancient Isle of Avalon." And there's a lot of reasons that people believe that Glastonbury is the ancient Isle of Avalon. One has to do with the medieval church. They said that they found King Arthur's body. And so, since it talks in the Welsh text about King Arthur being mortally wounded, and then the Lake Lady and Morgan Le Fay bringing him to Avalon, when the monks found his body, it was a clear indication that this was Avalon. Um, so that's one. That's one of the tales. But we do know that obviously this would have been an island. It fits the description. It's probably the most agreed upon location of where Avalon was. And so Avalon can be a physical place, but it
Sure.
can also be an astral place. Sorry, what was that?
I said, yeah, yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah, right? Okay, so now we're in modern day Glastonbury. The lake has, in the early I don't want to get the date wrong, probably late 1800s, maybe early 1900s, around that time period, the lake, the levels were drained, and it was all turned into farmland.
Mm.
And so this is when the town really started to kind of build up, and like the landscape started to build up. So, side note, when it rains, like really heavy, and we go up on the tour, it floods. And so
Oh,
you can see what it used to look like, and how this island,
wow.
like really, it's like tall hill in the middle of nothing, would have been like obviously like a beacon for people.
Wow.
So, but now that it's drained, we also know that there are sacred wells. There are tons of sacred wells that
Yeah.
are here in Glastonbury. So I say tons. Most people know about the Chalice Well, which is the most famous. And then there's also a Bridget's Well, which there's some it's been lost to kind of time. And then there's a Black Well in the Abbey. And then there's another hidden well about back behind the graveyard. And there was a couple others here and there that have been dried up or closed up by the water council. But The second most famous spring or well in Glastonbury is called the White Spring. And I came on pilgrimage in 2012 to I am getting to your question, by the way, that this is the short
This is
way
the
to
short
get to that.
version. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you got to know the history, right? Like there's so
Right.
much history, and you obviously are so steeped in the meaning and the history for this to have drawn you there is that's the
Oh, yeah.
question, right? Like so you go on this pilgrimage and
Yes. So 2012, I've been studying now with my teacher for 2 years, and I go to the Chalice Well because I'm gonna go to Avalon and I'm
yeah.
gonna experience everything.
Yep.
And so I go to Avalon, I go to the Chalice Well, I have my moment,
Yeah.
and then I knew that the White Spring was a thing, and then I knew like generally where it was. And so I I follow the footsteps of where I'm supposed to go, and I come to this building in the side of like the cliff, like a cliff face, like a hill, and it's this old Victorian well house, and the doors open, and I walk in, and I'm just in awe. It's an old Victorian well house that's set into like the side of a hill. So when you
Mm.
first go in, you have to go down a couple of stairs, and then it goes like deep. There's actually like it's very cave-like. And as I walk in, I see all of these shrines and like very like pagan shrines, like a shrine to the king of fairy with like the antler horns, goddess shrines. This whole place
Wow.
is lit by candles,
Wow.
and there's water like flowing through these pools and like through the floor. And it's just like amazing. And I'm just like in awe, and it takes my breath away. And I go into the shrine to the fairy king of Avalon, and I begin to meditate, and I hear and I get a message. Because I had just done my like year and a day, freshly, initiated. I've been learning these Avalonian mysteries,
Right.
but I didn't really know like what to do with any of that. Like
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I've like got the stamp, like I've done the things, like I'm fully fledged, but like now
Now
what?
what? Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the question that I was asking, and the answer that I got was teach water magic. And I was like, that's great. No, thank you. No thanks. Not me. And I fought it for about a year, and then I did actually start teaching water magic. And I taught at the Arizona Goddess Conference. I taught my first class on water magic. And then I turned that class into more classes, and then rituals, and then the next thing you know, we're hosting water rituals at Pagan Pride Day, and I wrote an entire like 9-month water magic course, and then that course got turned into my first book, which is Water Witchcraft: Magic and
Mhm.
Lore from the Celtic Tradition.
Mhm.
And about the time that that was finished and it was in the pipeline to be published, because the publishing game is a really long thing. It could be like a 3-year process,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, so at this point, it's in the birth canal, and I go on pilgrimage again. This time, though, I go with the Sisterhood of Avalon,
Mhm.
and we have like this amazing week where we like go to all these sacred sites, and we're crawling inside like burial chambers, and like chanting and doing ritual, and we're at the Chalice Well doing ritual, and then we go to the White Spring and we have a private booking. So now the whole place is closed, it's just
Mm.
us, and we have the space to ourselves. I think it's like maybe 90 minutes that day, I can't remember. But we did a little bit of chanting together, and then it was kind of like scattered to go do your thing. And so I went back to that same shrine space, and I
Right.
go back to meditate, and I say, okay, what's next? I did it. I did the thing. I taught the water magic.
Yeah.
Got turned into the course, which then turned into the book, which is teaching people water magic. So I've got it, right? And so what do I do now? And the message was finish the way of the water priestess. So when I first wrote Water Witchcraft, it was my first book. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was contracted for 50,000 words. And I turned in 97,000 or
Oh my
91,000.
God.
something like that, which I was like super proud of myself. And I
And they were
thought
like,
that,
no.
yeah, I thought my publisher was going to be like, wow, you're amazing. And they like kicked it back in like 3 hours and were like,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
were like, we won't cut this. We will not. You have to cut like 40,000
Oh
words.
my
And
God.
we cannot,
Oh
like,
my
we can't,
God.
we're not going to cut it. So I went in and I ended up cutting 30,000. And that 30,000 that I cut was all the Water Priestess stuff.
Mm.
And so it was just like sitting there. And I was just kind of like, I wasn't even thinking about like, gotta get the next one published, gotta get the next one published, right? But Spirit came in and was like, do it, like go forth and publish.
Right.
So I like came home from that and I sat in front of my computer and it's like it just came out of me. Sometimes I don't even think that I wrote it. It was
Yeah.
like channeled,
Yeah.
like it came out of me like a madness. Like it just was, yeah, it was a crazy experience. So long story short, I come back. So I promised at that point that I'll come back the next year, right? This is like within the next couple of years. I'll make another pilgrimage and it won't be so long in between. And this was, I think, 2018, 2019. So as you know, what happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can't get in. I cannot get in. And I'm like really upset about it. Meanwhile, I start writing Celtic Goddess Grimoire. So 2022 rolls around and everything is like finally repealed. Like we can travel to different places. We can, I can enter the UK without 10 days of quarantine and like all these fees. And a friend of mine wants to go. And so I go with her and we go on sacred pilgrimage and we get to Glastonbury for that part of the trip. And I go back I have another private booking and I go back into that same place in the White Spring, same shrine space. And a little cheekily, I'm like, I know what you want from me. It's a third book and I already started. And Spirit was like, nope, we don't care about that book. I mean, they do care about that book, but the Spirit of the White Spring was not as interested. The other god, like I work with a lot of goddesses, Sulis included, got her altar right behind me. And she was quite invested in the third book. And the goddesses that I work with and the feminine water spirits that I work with, like really were like invested in Celtic Goddess Grimoire and getting that published. So don't get me wrong when I say they weren't interested. It's the spirits in the White Spring that were just like, yep, nope, we don't care. That's not what we want from you this time. The message that I got was that you'd be moving to Glastonbury. So this is May of 2022.
Oh
The
my
message that I got
goodness.
is you'll be moving to Glastonbury before the end of 2022. So before 23, before the calendar switches over to 2023, that you'll be moving to Glastonbury. And I, much like the first time, was like, ha, no. Like, that's not gonna happen.
Right.
That's just my ego talking. That's, this, that, the other. Well, it came in loud and clear, and I had lots of opposition. And the next morning, I run. Very long story short, because I know we have other things to cover. But the next morning, I have decided that I'm not going to get out of bed. We're in a bed and breakfast. It's like 8:55. Breakfast ends at like 9. And so I have to be in the breakfast room at 9. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my food. There's like 5 minutes left. And I've decided I'm not going to breakfast. And Spirit proceeds to somehow drag me out of bed and kick me down the stairs. And there I am in the breakfast room with like 3 minutes to go. And I'm introduced to a woman who would change my life. She's the financial steward of the White Spring. And I was like, I didn't know you existed. I need to interview you because I have a series on my blog that's called Interview with a Water Priestess. And I interview women who are intimately connected with water and serving water. And I want to interview you. So she's like, oh, I don't have time because I have to be in a class in like 3 minutes. And she gives me your phone number. And all summer, we play phone tag.
Wow.
Now, that same day, I go into the Glastonbury Goddess Temple, where I'm still getting this message that I'll be moving to Glastonbury before 2023. And I'm just like, it's not going to happen. My son's still in high school. He's not graduating yet. Like this reason, this reason, this reason. Like I had 24 reasons why
Right.
I couldn't. And I started getting the answers. And they were not the answers that I wanted, but they were answers that worked. That's when you know you're really onto something.
Yes. Yes.
Because when you're like, I don't want to do that. And they're like, too bad. That's not the answer that I want. Too bad.
It's the
So,
answer. I mean, spirit is pretty good about giving you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear.
exactly. So there was a bit of a situation on that trip, a little bit of a mean girl situation. It ends, we go home, and I play phone tag with this woman all summer. And my husband is like, you got this message that you need to return to Glastonbury before the end of 2023. Because I started like switching it in my mind
Mm-hmm.
and being like, it's not move to Glastonbury. It's, like visit
Return.
again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So he's like, okay. So he buys us tickets and we come to Glastonbury and he's like, and you're going to go to Glastonbury and you're going to have a great time. And so we go to Glastonbury again. Now, this is late August, early September of 2022. And all summer I played phone tag with this woman, and I get to London and I text her and I'm like, I'm going to be in Glastonbury. Will you be around? And she says, yes. So we make a date and I go over to her house to interview her for my blog series. I get there and she starts interviewing me. And 3 hours later, she's like, do you think you can sell your property and purchase this house with me?
Oh
And
my
I was like,
God. What?
well,
What house?
well,
What?
my farm my homestead in Oregon, it had a lot of equity in it. And so I was able to put my house on the market and use the equity. And the house, I've gotten a bit ahead of myself here. So the house that she wants to purchase is a property that's adjacent to the White Spring.
Oh
And
my God.
oh, it's crazier. It happens to be the former home of the famous occultist Dion Fortune,
Oh my God.
who happened to write the novels Sea Priestess, which in my second book, Water Priestess, I have a whole section on her that I've written about as like her influence on the Water Priestess path. And
Wow.
I'm like, this is one of my favorite authors. And I want to move to Glastonbury. And I did get that message that I'd be moving here. And then, like crazy synchronicities, she gives me a plot map that she had printed out in June. That literally the day that she printed it was like on the paper, the plot map. And it was like my husband's birthday. And just all sorts of crazy stuff. So long story short, the house is about to go to auction and it's in rough shape. It's in rough shape. So everybody's planning on bulldozing it and just destroying it. And me and her are very much like, ooh, let's try and restore it because like Dion Fortune has a legacy with Avalon, with the Temple of Inner
Oh
Light,
my God.
with I mean, like there's so many famous occultists and priestesses and such that have come from Dion Fortune's teachings. My teacher began like she introduced me in 2010 to Dion Fortune's work. I mean, like full circle.
It's like the
You're familiar with Dion
craziest.
Fortune,
Yeah, yeah. This is the craziest
okay?
story. This is the
Right?
great. I mean, and again, like we are the witches. Like these synchronicities shouldn't surprise us, but wow. Okay, sorry. Go
Right?
ahead. Yeah.
So, um, so basically the house is about to go to auction. She's put in an offer already that was rejected, which is why she was like, well, do you want to try and do this with me? And I was like, yes. So 3 hours later, I'm running down the street with this plot map. My husband had like left the hotel to come and find me because I'd been gone so long. I was like, I'm just gonna interview this lady. I'll be back in an hour, and then that was like the beginning of September. And then the next thing you know, we're flying back to the US and we are figuring out how much equity we have in our property and putting it on the market and pooling our funds together and the property is going to auction. The day before it like goes to auction, we put in a pre-auction bid. We go to the owner and we say, we know there's a lot of people bidding and you know what they want to do with it. This is what we want to do with it. And this is how much money we have. And this is where we stop bidding. Like right here, this is it. So we're going to make you that offer because
Wow.
we don't have a penny more. So this is where we stop.
Wow.
You
Wow.
want
Wow.
us to
Wow.
have the property? Will you take this? And she said, yeah. And 45 days later, I was on a plane with 2 suitcases.
That's just incredible.
Right. And
Incredible.
right. So the idea is that I would move in and that my son and my husband would come with, and we would do renovations, we would restore it. And actually, so for those that get to see the video, this building that I'm broadcasting from right now is the first restored building. It is one of what they call the sleeping sheds that were on the property, where they would come and do like dream incubation, and they were working a lot of magic.
Wow.
When we did the renovations, we found 4 hagstones underneath the floorboards. Each one, 2 of them still had
Wow.
fiber to them. I've
Wow.
done some deep dives. I'm like 90% sure it's nettle fiber that's been hand spun. And while I cannot tell you that Dion Fortune tied that knot, it's probable that she did.
Wow.
If it's not her, then maybe one of the other people in the Temple of Inner Light that she was working with.
Wow.
Um, and so, yeah, so that's a hagstone from Dion Fortune's
I mean, it's just
property.
amazing. It's amazing because and we haven't even, I mean, we haven't even talked about your path as a water witch, except that you got these messages and you were able to, the water magic is what brought you to this place that is kind of like the hub of Avalonian water magic, right? And Celtic
Oh,
water
yeah.
magic. So I feel like we started at the end of your story as to this is where you are now, but I'm very interested in if you could tell us like what was your first experience with water magic, when that was in your life, and how you knew that this was something special.
Ooh, okay.
So go
So,
way back to your first experience of of discovering or working with water and why it was special. How did you know?
okay. So I actually have to go back to childhood because um it started to it was anchoring in childhood, and then but I was raised in a like evangelical Baptist
Mm,
born again,
yeah.
close to rapture cult
Yeah.
type of environment. Um it's not a rapture cult, but they're very obsessed with it. So that's what I grew up in, which both interestingly enough influenced me, and I feel like also like paved the way.
Sure.
Um, so because it was like this environment, I was homeschooled. So I spent a lot of time doing my like my work at home, and I'd finish it and then I'd head outside at about noon. Now our house, so I grew up in Florida, our house was on the edge of a wetland preserve.
Hmm.
And so I'd finish my homeschool work at like noon, and then I'd put on my wellies and I was out in the swamp for hours. And if I wasn't out in the swamp, then I was either up like in the river or the creek, which was like 5-10 minutes away, or at the beach, which was 5-10 minutes away, or at a spring, like just constantly. I also used to, when you get like money in your like birthday cards, you'd get like $5 or ten
Yeah. Yeah.
bucks,
Yeah.
that kind of, right? So I get birthday cards that had money in it, and then I would go to garage sales and I would buy all of these old folks decanters, like a dollar for a pretty jar. And
Yeah.
I would get back home and I had this whole collection of decanters and jars, and I put water in all of them, and I put food coloring in them so that I had on my dresser at like 8 years old, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, on the top of my dresser were all of these bottles that were full of water that had like different food coloring. So it was like color and light therapy and magic. And I'm like intuitively doing this in elementary school.
Yeah. Were
Now,
they just, I'm sorry to interrupt you, were they just filled with like water from the faucet, or were you filling them from like, this is swamp water, this is ocean water, this is spring water?
at that time, it was just from the faucet or from our well.
Mm-hmm.
But I hadn't really started like doing the different types of water, but I was putting food color in them,
It's
food coloring.
amazing.
But
Yeah.
I thought was really interesting because that picks up the light spectrum. And like we know just, I mean, basic witchcraft, like a red candle is for love. So
Yep.
like water
Yep.
that has red food coloring
And
in it, like,
chakra magic and chakra like
right.
energy, right?
Mhm.
Correspondences, right? For sure.
Exactly. And colors carry frequencies. And so of course I didn't know any of this. Like I just, this is what I intuitively was
You're
doing.
like,
I
it's
also,
so pretty.
right, I also would intuitively make things like flower soup, where we would go and like get a bowl from the kitchen and put water in it and then like put all the flowers, make potions
Yeah.
and like that
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? But also when I grew up and started like studying witchcraft, magic, herbalism, like all of these things, I was like, oh my God, that's a thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Flower essences are a thing. Um, okay, so growing up in this like very evangelical Baptist family, there was also this emphasis on the spirit world and that the spirit world did exist. But it was always put in such negative light, right? Like demons are gonna get you, and like,
Yeah.
like negative spirits can, attack you and this kind
Yeah.
of stuff. So there was this understanding that the spirit world existed. Now, fast forward, I graduate high school and I move out and I start my life. I get married, I have kid, I have my son, and I did this very early, by the way. Like I got married when I was 21. And I had my son when I was like 22. And so I also was going to university at this time, and like the big wide world of not that very insulated environment came
Right.
flooding in.
Right. Learning
And
different things, meeting different people, basically expanding your mind and going, oh, these are things that are maybe I was taught was wrong or bad. And yet now you're open to new things.
yes.
Cool.
And I was looking through a mail order catalog and I got to the back of it, and there was a little like 1 by 1 inch square or 2 by 2 inch square, like this tiny little like black and white square advertisement on the back page of this catalog. And all it said was witchcraft books. And then there was a URL. And I remember that it like jumped out of the page and like just smacked my face. And I was like, what?
There
Like,
are books? What?
right? Like it's real?
Yup.
Okay. So I
Yup.
ordered a stack and they came and I devoured them. So first off, you should know that I'm not a reader. I spent my entire childhood picking on my older sister because all she did was read.
Mm,
So for me to actually sit down
mm,
and read a
mm-hmm.
book,
Yeah.
even devour a book
Yeah.
or multiple books, was so out of character. Um, obviously now I know like I shouldn't have picked on my older sister for reading books. That was her journey to take. Honestly, I just wanted her to play with me and she never would. So, um, but but now I know that's definitely bad, but that gives context to
Right.
like I was not the reader in the
Right.
family.
Right.
And so I started reading these books and I got like a quarter of the way or half of the way through like one of them. And I was like, oh my gods, this is me. I had never, like, I had spent my entire life trying to fit into these prescribed containers.
Yes. Yes.
And I opened this book and I read it, and it described who I was, what I loved, what I was attracted to, why I was the way that I was, what I
Right.
like. It gave validity to these core beliefs that I
Yep.
had. And that is when I just knew. I just knew it. Now, oh man, I forgot two important parts. Okay, going back to when I was 11 years old, living in Florida, Being raised in that evangelical Baptist kind of upbringing, always in conflict with my parents, with my family. Like I just never fit in.
Yeah.
We were at a spring, and it's a strange spring because it kind of comes out of the side of a rock and then flows, where most springs in Florida function more like a lake, where the water kind of bubbles up from the ground and it creates a pool. But this one didn't. There was a rock and it flowed and it created like a lazy river type of thing. And you go to the top and you put your inner tube in, and then you tube down and you go up and you tube down, and like that is like a big recreational thing. Something happened, some injustice that I was upset about, that I was crying about, that, just very dramatically 11-year-old, like, "Mah," and
Yeah.
I'm like sitting and upset and just I was I was in conflict with my family. They don't understand me. I feel so outcast. I don't even understand why they want me. Like all these like typical thoughts, I think, for that
Sure.
age.
Yeah.
Also, to be a natural born witch in a family of evangelicals, like you could see that there's like this, you
Right.
know, like obviously energetic discrepancy. So I get to the top of where the spring is, not far down where the inner tubes go in, but like way at the top. And
Right.
it's narrow and deep enough that you can get in the water. So I kind of dramatically throw myself into the water. And when you go underwater, you can scream really,
Yes.
really loud, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can hear you. So I thought. So there I am, upset, needing to release, and I throw myself into the water, and I'm zooming through the water on this current, and I'm screaming my lungs out. And I say something along the lines of like, help me, save me from this. Like, you have to, like, someone save me from this. And I thought that I was reaching like to God, right? And I got an answer. And it certainly wasn't the God of the Bible that answered. It
Right.
was this presence, this envelopment, this something that answered. And it was the answer. I don't know the exact words because it was so long ago, but it was something like, okay, we'll save you. Like, we've saved you, you're ours. Like that kind of thing.
Mm. Like you felt immediately um the loved and like you had a place.
Yes, yes. And there was, it felt like a presence answered me when I said, "Save me from this." And they said, "Okay,
Like
we'll
we
save
got
you.
you. We got you, girl.
We've got you." Exactly.
Wow.
Moments later, the top of my foot. Now I'm with the current is fast, especially when you're low on the in this little area, right? So then moments later, the top of my left foot, which interestingly enough, left with like later on, I learned that like Christianity always likes to think of themselves as the right-handed path and the occult is the left-handed path, or the good is the right, the bad is the left, or the masculine is the right and the goddess is the left,
Right.
right? Later on, I'd learned that. So left was very, like my left foot was important. But moments after that, the top of my foot, like that soft place,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, after your toes,
Yeah.
strikes the top of a rock. And
Mm.
it was some of the most horrific pain I've ever felt. It felt like this pain just like shot up my leg, almost gave me dead leg. And I just like I was bleeding and I kind of pulled myself over to the side, and that rock punctured my foot in the perfect shape of a downward pointing triangle.
Hmm.
And the downward pointing triangle is the alchemical glyph for water. So not only did this presence, like not only did I cry out for help, and this presence then kind of like say yes, acknowledged that cry for help, but then I struck that rock. There was blood exchange, and they marked me. Then life went on for years. And that's when we get back to where I'm, um, my son and all that kind of stuff, having read the witchcraft books and all that kind of stuff. And that is when I start putting everything together.
Can we
Is when I
rewind a little bit? I want to rewind a little bit. So, the question I had asked you was, can you remember the first time that you felt drawn to water, or that, the first time you realized water was, magical for you. Would you say there really isn't, because you started with, I used to play in the water and then I had these jars of water and all that, and then you had this moment that feels like it was almost like a coming of age, like you're in your teens, you're having a rough moment and it's defining. Is that the moment that you look back and you define and you say, I was always inclined to working with this element, but this was the moment that solidified my relationship with this element? Would you say yes?
Yes. If you had asked me when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 20, I would have said no. But because it was through the study of all of these things that I really started to put the pieces together. And
Yes.
so now I can absolutely look back and say that was such a defining moment.
What is it about water specifically? Because if we're, as witches, we're dealing with earth, air, fire, and water and spirit, right? Why water? What is it about water for you specifically that is so personal, and why this element specifically?
Oh, that's tough. Oh, ooh. It it was I looked through everything. So there was a certain point that I started really doing a lot of reflecting and looking back. And it wasn't like I chose water. It was really in probably in my mid 20s, mid to late 20s, maybe even early 30s that I really mid to late 20s, definitely mid to late 20s, when I started to really like peel back the layers of like who I am, what am I doing here, what's meant for me. And I started doing a lot of reflecting and healing of my past. And through that process, I started realizing that at every pivotal moment, water was playing a huge role in my path. And everything that gave me the yes, the like, go this direction, was always influenced by water, whether it was where I was, what I was doing. I mean, I would started doing moon circles on the beach. That was like when I first
Mm.
started like hosting rituals for people. The location I chose was the beach. My first contact with like a goddess, like conscious contact with a goddess, again, near water or close to water. Everything. Like if you were to look at a map of Anwyn's path, Anwyn's life, right? Uh, then you would see all of the important road markers that were kind of on that journey were all connected to water.
That's really incredible. You had talked earlier about, as a child, playing in this kind of water versus that kind of water, and so on, and I had said I grew up on Long Island, New York, surrounded by water. One side is the ocean and one side is the bay, but I never felt connected to that particular water. I live now in New England, where ocean is a little farther away. It's just not so prevalent. Ocean water has never really spoken to me. I don't feel a draw to it. When I think about water and working with water, I think about a lake. I think about fresh water. I think about vegetation, green space, and water, and waterfalls, and that type of body of water. Um, can you just tell us quickly, for people that may be just starting to work with water, are there differences in different bodies of water that are found naturally occurring? And just a quick, like, if you could just kind of rattle off, like, ocean water, this, fresh water, that, and so on.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I'm like you, where I have a deep love for the ocean, but the water that sings to me is the fresh water. It's
Hmm.
actually why I wrote Water Priestess and not Sea Priestess,
Hmm.
is because I was on this quest to really be like, but I'm not as connected to the ocean as I am to these
Yeah.
other places. So it was in my quest for the fresh water that sacred practices around that that really helped me to formulate a lot of my work. So waterfalls are great for cleansing
Mm.
and renewal. The ocean is great. You can work with the tides. The ocean is very dynamic with its energy. You can work with the tides. High tides can be about manifesting things, whereas low tides or tides that are going out can be about banishing things.
Mm.
There's also lots of healing that can take place with the ocean. And then you also get the added depth of like the energies of like the Mariana Trench versus the Caribbean. So you do get like a really
Right.
broad spectrum of energies with ocean. Lakes are amazing because they're still bodies of water. They can be mirrors, you can scry with them. They do have links with healing spirits, like lake ladies, from like the Welsh area. There's like
Yeah.
connection with healing. They're also portals into the subaquatic realms and into the other world.
Mm.
Rivers. Rivers are amazing bodies of water for movement. You want to release something, take your finger on a green leaf, right? Like press into that little leaf what you want to release and put that leaf in a river and watch it go. Uh,
Wow.
so rivers are great for releasing. When I was living in Oregon, I used to do a yearly like into the river and let the sitting backwards. So the current was coming over my shoulders, like over my head and shoulders to do
Yeah.
cleansing. So it's great for cleansing. And then I left my favorite for last, and that is sacred springs.
Yeah.
Springs, wells, fountains. Fountains in old texts are the same as springs and wells. They are also entrances into the other world. They have a long history of tons of magic, specifically around healing. But interestingly enough, they also have a long history of being connected to cursing. So wells and springs have both the energy of healing and of cursing.
To give and to take away, right? Like with if you give water, if I'm just thinking like, but my brain, and I am not in any way, shape, or water witch, right? Like the most water magic I do is I like to do a little shower ritual, a cleansing shower ritual. I feel like that's something that everybody can do easily if you just are mindful about it. But I think about the first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, if you're doing well magic, if your well is abundant, you're giving life. And if your well is dry, you're taking life, right? Or
Absolutely.
taking energy. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I've never really thought about it in that way before. So that's really very
And
interesting.
there's also the phenomenon that sometimes, like when you put silver into some of the like thermal springs or some of the
Yeah.
springs, it will turn it black, or like poisoned wells. So we always think of like wells as like these life-giving bodies of water, but
Mhm.
there are some that are very specific to like death, cursing, poisoning, things like that. And then you
Wow.
have like sacred wells or springs like Sulis's, which are world like known throughout the Celtic, Roman, Regency, Victorian period as like renowned healing locations. But when they did the excavations, they found 150 curse tablets. So they have both energies
Wow.
of healing and cursing.
Wow. So cool. All right. Well, on that note, let's take a quick break. Because I really do want to save a few minutes to talk about your new book, The Celtic Goddess Grimoire. And we've got to tell people all about that. Most of us, I think humans in general, tend to take water for granted, even though we're, 80% water ourselves. But and it's something we need to survive. And I think we definitely take it for granted. And even as witches, I feel like water, everybody's like fire, fire, let's work with fire, and let's work with earth. And I don't think people really give air and water, like the two things we really can't live without. They we don't pay as much attention to them as we should. So I'm very happy to talk with you about all of this, and I definitely want to bring this to everyone's attention. Your new book, Celtic Goddess Grimoire, which is really beautiful. How do you go from all this water magic to this Celtic goddess Grimoire. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes, because they're not separate.
Ah, I
That's
see.
why. And honestly, one of the reasons why I really was compelled to write the book. So we just ended before the break with talking about Sulis, the goddess of
Hmm.
both healing and cursing. She is the first goddess in the book. Not the
Yes.
first chapter, but she is the first entry, and she is first and foremost because she has been such an impactful part of my life.
Mm.
Um, but not just Sulis. You'll notice that throughout the book, I have a connection with many of them. And this was also kind of going back to one of the things we talked about before with like putting those pieces of the puzzle together to really realize like it's been water all along. When I look at all of the Celtic goddesses that have come to me in dreams and meditations through healing work, or that I've worked with, or and even out of the Celtic pantheon, when you really start looking at the spirits and guides that showed up for me, they were all connected to water.
Mm.
Rhiannon has been with me since the beginning of my when I first married my husband, which was 19 years ago. And for the longest time, I was convinced that she wasn't a water goddess. And I was going to put her in the book anyways. And as I'm going through, I realize that I have been looking for her connection with water for so long that it was right in front of my face. So Rhiannon's story, as we know, comes from the Mabinogi, and it's kind of in three different parts, where there's Rhiannon the bride, Rhiannon then the mother, and then Rhiannon also a mother, but in an older state, and how she gets turned from her connection with horses and how she has to act like a horse or a mule, and then does get turned into a mule at the very end. And this is Rhiannon's story, except Rhiannon does show up in other texts, really tiny little bits of it. And in one of them, it says that there's something called a dare Rhiannon, which is the birds of Rhiannon. And they
Mm.
describe these birds of Rhiannon. And they are birds that have the ability to sing the dead awake and to lull the living to sleep. And that they are located on an island out in the ocean.
Huh.
And I was like, Rhiannon's birds are in an island in an ocean, like on an island in an ocean. And also the description of these birds are so similar to that of what we get from the Odyssey with the description of the sirens that I was like, oh my gosh, Rhiannon's
Wow.
birds
Our
are like sirens in the ocean, which means that that island is Rhiannon's ocean. That's her connection to water, and there it is. And so as I was going through, I was noticing that almost every single Celtic goddess, not all, but almost all of them had a connection with water. Even the Morrigan has a connection with the washer at the ford. Nematona, there's like sacred wells that are connected to her. The only one that I couldn't find a connection to water was Andraste. And that is because the only evidence that we have of Andraste is from the Roman depiction of Boudica and how she kind of invoked Andraste before war. So that's the only one that I couldn't. There were goddesses that were named after rivers, or the rivers were named after the goddesses. There were stories of goddesses that therefore created rivers, or because of their story, a
right.
river happened, a spring sprang forth, or like Epona. She was another one where I was like, there's nothing like really watery about her. But then the tribe that most worshipped her was like living on the edge of a river. And so
Right.
like the people that worshipped her were connected to the river. So some of them were stretches, like like what I've just mentioned. But yeah, they basically were all deeply connected to water
So let
somehow.
me ask you this, because this book is Celtic goddesses, right? You are an Avalonian water priestess witch. Why do you think that the Celtic goddesses specifically are so deeply even the ones that are tangentially connected to water, there is this thread through all of these goddesses. In your opinion, Why do you think that has to do with the nature of where the Celts lived, where they began, where their traditions come from? You know, when looking at a people and their geography, you know, like, do you think that has something to do with this, or do you think it's something else?
So, in 2016, I actually used to teach a class that was called Cult of the Sacred Springs and Holy Wells. And it was all about how the Celts and their descendants and the people that live in the Celtic landscapes were connected with water, to the point where um, not only were the Christian church, so all of the Christian churches in England and many places in Europe, they are built either near or on or in conjunction with a sacred well, or a
Mhm,
holy fount. And
mhm,
the reason that this was done is because they placed the Christian churches on top of the old pagan sacred sites, or the old Celtic sacred sites. So that's one part of it. But also when we were doing when archaeologists were excavating and doing different things like that, like they were finding that the Celts had these deep references for water, to the point where they believed that they were portals into the other world or into the ancestral realm, and they would often deposit their offerings into things like lakes and rivers. So, in order for them to give an offering to a deity or a spirit, they were therefore taking it and placing it in the water. So, there was this idea that water was a portal into the other world, and it's evident within the archaeological evidence that they were
wow.
just so deeply connected
Wow.
in that.
That's so, so interesting. I think that the book really gives the Celtic Goddess Grimoire book that you've just written. I think it gives a different perspective. I think there's a lot of books on individual Celtic goddesses out there. And this gives you this kind of broad overview. And it is a grimoire, it's a workbook. Like there's a lot of practices, rituals, things you can do in here. It's not just the history, but one of the things I love is how you've mapped out the Celtic lands, and so you can really see and you can go, oh, this is where the tribes were. And I think that's an additional um, level of understanding and dedication that you've taken to these goddesses and to this work. So I think, and it's really invoking, right? Invoking the enduring power of the Celtic feminine divine is that subtitle. And I definitely think that through this work, you can really work with these goddesses in a way maybe you haven't before, and tying together that water magic. Again, it's so prevalent in our lives that we don't realize. So I really think you've done an excellent job. Anwyn, where can people find out more about what you do, how to buy your book, how to learn from you online? Can you give us your all of your ways to reach you?
Yes. Okay. First and foremost, I am most active on Instagram, at Annwyn Avalon, just my first and last name. If you do follow me on Instagram, make sure that you look for the account that's been around since 2013 and has like 65,000 followers. Every given week, I have anywhere from 5 to 10 fake scam accounts. And I promise I will never DM you about reading or giving me money or anything like that. So if you follow me on
Yep.
Instagram, like please beware that that happens. It's never me, I promise. Just block and delete. But that is my main platform for like social things. I post a lot over there. I tend to go in waves. Very
Ha
tidal.
ha. Ha ha.
I'm very tidal right now. I haven't been posting much for the past 2 weeks, but like the 3 weeks before that, it was like every single day. But I post a ton of stuff over there, and it also links you to all the different projects I do. You'll see in the description that there's the links to like other Instagram accounts like Water Priestess Arts, which is just
Mm-hmm.
water priestessing,
So if there
bewitching
was
the
just one tag or one website, what is the best way? Just the one.
Oh, that's so tough. Waterwitchcraft.com.
Waterwitchcraft.com and at Annwyn Avalon on Instagram, right? And
Yes.
we'll put all of your links on the show notes so people will be able to find you. If they want to follow up with you, and they can buy this book, Celtic Goddess Grimoire. It's through Wiser Books, but you can order it wherever books are sold, and you can support your local bookstores, your local metaphysical shops. You can buy it online if you have to, but support local where and when you can. Okay, Annwyn, I have one last question for you. I ask this to every guest that comes on the show. I'm a kitchen witch. So if you could have me cook you one magical meal as a kitchen witch, what would it be and why?
Oh man, that's so hard. Um, Chicken soup.
Ooh,
Yeah.
chicken soup. Just like do you want like a hearty, creamy chicken soup or like a brothy, herby chicken soup?
Brothy, herby chicken soup with lots of root vegetables. Uh,
Mm,
I don't do well with any other meat except for chicken, so
yeah.
I'm always chicken. Chicken is my favorite.
Yes.
But I'm obsessed with potatoes and carrots, and chicken soup done right is like the best. It can heal, it can make you
Mm-hmm.
feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so nourishing, especially
Yeah.
if it's like really herby, because then you're getting all the plant
Yep.
medicine.
Yep. And I make my
So,
own bone broth for that chicken
oh
soup.
yeah.
So I'll roast a whole chicken, make the bone broth. It'll take 24 hours, and then I'll make soup out of that. And I would do like parsnips and potatoes and carrots and
Come
all
over to
that
my house
kind of.
now.
I will come to Glastonbury anytime. Okay, I didn't need an excuse to go to England anyway. No, you're delightful, Anwyn. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your experiences, your information, your knowledge is really unparalleled. I wish we had all day. We don't, but you just have so much information, and I'm just so grateful that you decided to share it with us today. Everybody, go check out Annwyn Avalon on Instagram and grab the book Celtic Goddess Grimoire. Thank you so much for being here. It was so delightful to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
It
been
was
wonderful.
wonderful, wonderful. And until next time, everyone, I wish you so many blessings and so much gratitude.